Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about some more issues of G.I. Joe. Now, these issues of G.I. Joe are written by Larry Hama, drawn by Ron Wagner, and honestly, they're pretty good. They're very character-driven issues, and they're really solid. These, more than a lot of the other issues that follow them, which I'll be talking about later, really do feel like they're about the characters first and introducing new toys and situations second. And I think these issues actually strive a really good balance between introducing, like, having your new characters and your legacy characters. But honestly, there are a couple of big things going on in the G.I. Joe comic that you do need to be aware of for this video. And so I would highly recommend watching the last G.I. Joe video on the channel. It's a pretty solid video, but for those of you who don't go and watch it, I'll just recap. The main thing that happened in the last set of stories was the pit, G.I. Joe headquarters, was destroyed, and Cobra Commander and Destro were trapped. Were down in the pit when it all blew up, and so they're presumed dead. So, and that's going to be important. And the destruction of the pit basically means the G.I. Joe team doesn't have a real headquarters, and right now Cobra's kind of winning, because they've got Cobra Island. We had heard in the last set of stories about how they were going to be building a embassy building in New York, in the middle of Manhattan. So Cobra is just kind of is definitely winning right now in G.I. Joe. And yeah, so we're actually just going to hop straight into our story from there. And our story begins with Scarlet and Snake Eyes throwing a bouquet of flowers down into the destroyed pit as a way to honor Cobra Commander and Destro, both of who are presumed dead. And the Baroness also flies by, and she drops off her own bouquet, mourning her lost love, Destro. And we then cut to Cobra Island, where we see Serpentor making a deal with the revolutionaries of Cerro Gordo. Cerro Gordo is a fictional small country that they set a bunch of G.I. Joe stories in. Basically just supposed to be like a stand-in for any number of Middle Eastern countries. Based on the time period, I would say it's supposed to be a stand-in for Grenada, maybe Iran or Iraq, something like that. But he's striking a deal with them to buy a new air defense system, a Terrordrome. And it's very expensive, but it comes with a small advanced attack fighter called the Firebat. We've seen the Firebat active before on Cobra Island, so we know that it's a pretty nice little thing. Back at Fort Wadsworth, the base that the pit was located on, we see the Joes meeting their new pilot, Slipstream, before we cut down to the bottom of the pit, and we see that Destro and Cobra Commander are still alive, but they can't get out of the pit. In Cerro Gordo, we see that construction on the first Terrordrome is almost finished. And at Fort Wadsworth, we see Hawk come up with a plan to investigate these new Terrordromes, because they finally exist somewhere where there is no diplomatic immunity. They exist not on Cobra Island. But they need somebody to be able to get into the Terrordrome. And we see Hawk's final version of the plan begin to take place as Flint and Slipstream take off in the new Conquest X-30, which is another experimental plane. Back in Cerro Gordo, we see that the Firebat is launched from the Terrordrome to fight off the Joe fighter plane. And we see a good old-fashioned dogfight. It goes on for a little too long, but it eventually ends with the Conquest X-30 going down and Flint parachuting out. Tomax and Xamot, the Crimson Guard twins, two of Cobra's little minions, go off to collect Flint and bring him into the Terrordrome as a prisoner. We then cut back to Fort Wadsworth, where we see Slipstream report to Hawk that the mission was a success and that the plane wasn't actually destroyed. And we see that Scarlet and Flint have been watching this whole thing unfold with Hawk. And neither one of them likes this plan very much. Back in Sierra Gorda, we see Flint hooked into the brainwave scanner so that Cobra can learn all of his secrets. Back at Fort Wadsworth, we see that the pit is beginning to flood, and Destro and Cobra Commander are going to drown. So Cobra Commander and Destro begin to search for a way out, and eventually Destro discovers a digging machine. Then we cut to above ground, where we see that Grunt, one of the original Joes, has decided to leave the team and go off to college. In the Terradrome, we see Dr. Mindbender is having trouble getting the brainwave scanner to work on Flint, and that Flint's face seems a little weird, a little rubbery. Destro and Cobra Commander resurface in a clothing shop so that they can get some disguises, and they also buy a car. Back in Sierra Gorda, we see a Joe team, which is led by Stalker with and Beachhead, Leatherneck, and Lowlight all supporting the team. And they're all supporting the counter-revolutionaries. But they're basically just there to get into the Terradrome to free Flint. And inside, we see Dr. Mindbender pull off the face mask, revealing the ruined remains of Snake Eyes' face, making it an even better capture than they had thought it was. Destro and the Commander are cruising until they're pulled over by a cop who recognizes Cobra Commander as Billy's father. Billy is Cobra Commander's estranged son, who once tried to kill him and was later presumed dead in a car crash. So Cobra Commander goes to Billy and makes a promise to his comatose son to stand by him to be better. Back in Sierra Gordo, the fight is heating up as the Joes and counter-revolutionaries are pushing into the Terradrome. Some of the Joes have gone in disguise, and they find Snake Eyes and give him his gear. As the Joes are running out, Stalker takes some pretty heavy fire. Leatherneck's able to take out the chopper that the heat came from, but it becomes clear that unless someone stays to cover the retreat, no one's making it out. So Snake Eyes attaches a night vision scope to Leatherneck's M16 grenade launcher and stays to give his friends time to get out, much to the horror of Stalker. Snake Eyes begins to fight, but as the Joes walk through the jungle, they see a series of explosions in the distance where Snake Eyes was last seen. We then cut to Snake Eyes being carried through the jungle and back to the Terradrome by some Cobra troopers, after getting knocked out by a volley of stun grenades. The Cobras begin to pack up and ship out any valuable equipment while they're preparing for a second assault against the Terradrome from the Joes. On the USS Flag, the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier, we see that Stalker is feeling really guilty about having to leave Snake Eyes behind. But Scarlet's getting ready to come in with some backup for the Joes in Sierra Gordo. We then cut and see Grunt at college, where he becomes friends with a girl who also served in the army. Back in Sierra Gordo, we see the Joes making a final push for the Terradrome. Meanwhile, the Cobras are packing the brainwave scanner into the fire bat and putting Snake Eyes into the evacuation helicopter, both of which are headed for the Cobra Consulate building in Manhattan. Mindbender and Baroness decide to destroy the Terradrome while they make their escape, but Tripwire is able to defuse the charges and then uses them to bring down the Terradrome, but in sections that the Joes can use to learn the internal workings of the Terradrome. The Cobras are watching as the Joes make a pulley and lever system to get the pieces of the Terradrome onto a train that's going to be driven by Flint. After a few hours of working, they get enough of the pieces to get going. So the Cobras report to Serpentor that he needs to follow the train and destroy it. But we see that the train was just a fake, and that the real plan was to use flotation devices from the Flag and to get the pieces home. As Scarlet and Flint reflect about the mission, Scarlet becomes even more determined to go get Snake Eyes and bring him home. Then, as a little interlude, we see Destro flying home to Scotland. To open our final issue, we see Snake Eyes being taken into the Cobra Consulate building. And Scarlet sees Snake Eyes being taken, so she goes to Storm Shadow to ask him for help. In the consulate building, we see the brainwave scanners beginning to work, as images of Snake Eyes' past are being shown on the screen. We then see Storm Shadow infiltrate the building through the sewer. He has to fight some Cobras along the way, but nothing he can't handle. Scarlet tries to go through the front door, but is caught by the Baroness. And before we see what happens to her, we cut back to Snake Eyes, who's starting to break free from the brainwave scanner's control. We then see Storm Shadow fighting some of the red ninjas in the fuel section of the building, before he eventually decides to just light them on fire. Snake Eyes is able to totally break free of the brainwave scanner, and he begins to fight, but he's surrounded until Storm Shadow throws him a sword, enabling him to fight back with a vengeance. Then more red ninjas show up, but Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes just blow him up using a claymore. And as Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes are almost out of the building, the Baroness shows up behind them and puts a gun to the back of each of their heads and walks them out of the consulate building before she takes off her glasses and a wig to reveal that it was Scarlet all along. So, yeah, and the story just kind of wraps up there. Nice little bow, so they get Snake Eyes back, and that's it. And honestly, that last part, the silent part with no words, that came from what was called the G.I. Joe yearbook, which is basically just an annual, and I don't know. I would find that really frustrating if I was reading the G.I. Joe comic as it came out, and all of a sudden I had to read the annual to understand what was happening in the comic. I really wouldn't like that. But I do get it. You needed to have I guess both stories must have been ready at the same time. This issue and the next one were probably both ready, or they were able to get the editor to sign off on doing a silent issue in the yearbook, but not for the regular comic. I don't know. That little formatting thing does kind of bug me, but it's whatever. It is what it is. And honestly, this story is pretty good. There's a lot that I like about it. I like that that it's about Snake Eyes without being about Snake Eyes, I like that it's more about Stalker and Scarlet and Flint and Hawk, all these characters that know, and all of Snake Eyes' friends basically, and Storm Shadow even. But honestly, it's just fine, honestly. It has a lot of... It kind of has some of the trappings of the problem with the G.I. Joe comic at the time, where, the conflict never really ends, The Joes win but lose at the same time, all those... They get the Terrordrome parts, but all the sensitive information was taken out of the Terrordrome. They get Snake Eyes back, but that's it. They don't bother taking out any, my biggest question reading this yearbook is always, why does Baroness live when Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow kill a lot of people? And why does Dr. Mindbender live also? Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are tearing through everybody to get out, and yet they just leave Dr. Mindbender alive for no good reason. And same with Baroness. Scarlet has her dead to rights, apparently, and she just decides to leave her be for no good reason. It's just kind of a weird end to the story. And when you see all the things that Dr. Mindbender and Baroness go on to do, it's why don't they just blow up the whole building or something like that? Honestly, I do like these issues a lot. They strike a good balance between introducing new Joes, Low Light, Slipstream. I think there's another new one that they introduced somewhere in here, and keeping it about the old characters. Honestly, this whole story is really about, you really start to see a lot of Stalker taken to place, where he feels super guilty about Snake Eyes being staying behind to protect him, which is something that Snake Eyes had already done for Stalker once in the Vietnam War. And honestly, like, there's just a lot of moments like that. There, Destro and Cobra Commander's escape from the pit is honestly just kind of a take it or leave it moment. It's really bizarre that they decided to just have you think they're dead for like 5 pages and then reveal that they're alive. Honestly, I kind of wish that they had just died, or at least that Cobra Commander had died, because basically we just see him, he shows up to the hospital where Billy's in his coma, and he's like making a promise to his comatose son of like, I'm gonna be a better dad to you, Billy. And it's like, did we really need to keep Cobra Commander alive for this? And we'll see more of Destro next time I talk about G.I. Joe. But even with him, it's still like, with the things that you do coming from here, did you need to do them? But I do appreciate that they didn't just kill off the 2 main villains of the comic to make way for Serpentor, basically. And Serpentor is a weird character, because he's like, he's your immortal soldier, commander, whatever, and yet he just he doesn't really do anything in this story. He's basically just follow-up support for Tomac, Xamot, Baroness, and Dr. Mindbender, and it's just an interesting little story. And honestly, I would have liked to see a little bit more of Snake Eyes fighting in the jungle in issue 55, in that second issue that I talked about. Because we basically just see one panel of him like jumping out, shooting all the cobras, and then it cuts to everybody walking away, and just a series of explosions off in the jungle. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's just a good series of comics. The art by Ron Wagner is honestly some of the best it's ever been in these issues. The writing by Larry Hama definitely seems, it's still good, but it seems it's getting to the point of being a little like, okay guys, come on. I believe this is one of the first issues that was edited by the new editor for the G.I. Joe series, Bob Harris. But honestly, it's a solid series. I would still recommend these issues, but I wouldn't recommend them like, $1, $2, maybe even up to $3 for that yearbook. Honestly, they're pretty good. But yeah, that's really all I've got for you today. So, I'm just another guy named James, and I'll see y'all next time.